Hi there and welcome to the Hobbytime at Healys YouTube channel. Thank you very much for tuning in and this is right here today. This is part 2 of this right here. This is the Army Painter wet palette review where I'll be giving my basically thoughts on it about 1 week later after use of it and whether or not I think it is worth it. If you haven't checked out part 1 in this series, click the eye right here and there will be a link that takes you right to it. Check it out. It's me unboxing this and showing you what comes in the box and basically, you know, what it is compared to my own home use palette that I had at the time. Now, for this part, this video is actually broken up into various sections. Each one I'll be doing tests on this. So the first one is me, how I got on with setting it up, because there were no instructions in the box with this, so I did have to experiment a little bit. Another part is a few tests, so things like a shape test to see how the paint's held up, and going over the brush storage. So with those, basically, if you want to get to a specific section, click the links in the description below, and that'll take you to a certain time in it. If not, please watch and enjoy. I hope you enjoyed the video. So this is where I sort of first off look to set up using the wet palette. Now, one of the things I found quite interesting, which I've just kind of noticed, was now I've not used this for probably, I'd say, 24, 48 hours. It's been about 2 days since I've actually used it. And the foam, as you can see here, has actually shrunk in size compared to where it was right at the beginning. It's actually sort of gone a bit. Now, in terms of when it's dried out, where you've obviously got quite malleable here in the middle, this area here is quite firm. So as with any sponge, it will shrink as it dries out. But it's interesting to know that straight out of the packet, there was no water added to it. It's basically lasted for about 48 hours. Before it started to dry out. It is still wet in the middle, but that's just with this natural moisture, so it is quite good. What also does show me as well is how well this seals with the strap on top of it, so I am quite happy with that. What I am going to say is that I have used the other foam and tried to sort of guess roughly about how much water to use. There are various ways that I've sort of found to use this. One of the easiest things that I've done is I've actually taken the other hydro foam. I have ran it under the tap so it would absorb moisture, and then placed that inside the wet palette. The advantage with that is that it controlled how much water was actually just in the sponge. There wasn't like a pool at the bottom, and I found that actually the results were quite good. Alternatively, if you you're like very much like myself, you have water on your station because it's obviously in your paint pot or something like that. I've worked out that around about literally probably 35 ml to 50 ml of water, depending on how sort of long you want your paint to last, is about the right one. So I've got some water here. I'm just going to, so you can see it does really soak up that water, and especially on these areas where it was particularly dry. So basically I just soaked it in, and as you can see it almost like right now, the sponge is expanding, which is exactly what you want. I'm just going to let that absorb and see how much obviously that's going to take. Put a little bit over this end. And it should take up almost that room entirely at the bottom. Sometimes you have to just place it down. Where it comes folded in the packet, it does sometimes have this little bubble here in the middle. Now, yeah, so I'm pretty happy with that. That's the good sort of amount of sort of water on there. Next up is to get your hydro sheet and actually apply that on top. Again, this will sort of stick. Now, with the sheets, because obviously they do over time become crumpled, and they do curl when you get them out of the packet because they've got nothing to adhere to. So once that sponge is fully sort of absorbent, you put the sheet on top and then just spend a minute or two just brushing the bubbles out. This will give you a much more even surface to use your paints on, and obviously give you control over that. If you've got a bubbly one, you'll find that it will pool in places. You'll have more paints than in one place than another, and you really want that nice even sort of as evenness to it. So I'm just going to leave that a moment, and as you can, it's nice because the hydro sheets are kind of, they're almost damp to the touch but not wet. What you don't want is to have loads of water on here, or put the sheet on and then pour your water over the top. I do find then that you do get a lot of the water just sitting on the top, which is, if you really want to thin your paints down, then fine. But personally for me, it's not how I've enjoyed doing it. I really would recommend wetting the sponge first, then after that, putting the sheet on, leaving it for a minute or two, and then just taking the time just to brush out any air bubbles. And as you can see now, we can see through the hydro sheet, that sponge or the hydro foam at the bottom has literally gone almost to the sides and taken up all the room on the palette, which is really good. That's what you want to see. You want that full surface. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this Blood Angels intercessor here, and I'm going to use some of the paint on it, and I'm just going to paint the bolt gun. And I'm just going to use Citadel Lead Belcher just for that first layer. And I'm just going to basically show you how I use my wet palette and how we basically, you know, to control your paints on there. So first I'm just going to give this a bit of a shake. So once you've got your paint all nice and shaken up, now I do, you know, you just want to get it set up, and then obviously, as normal, wet your brush, and we'll pot over here to the side. So I'm going to take the amount of paint I want to use. Now the advantage of the wet palettes is that because it's already wet, you don't need to be applying loads and loads and loads of water to your palette, to the paint to thin it out. Now personally, I still do. I still use just a little bit, just because it still gives you that sense of you can get it to that perfect consistency you want. So just a few drops just there. Just get those moved together. Now as you can see with this lead belcher here, it's actually really thin straight away. I didn't use much water there, and it's almost ready to use it. To be fair, I find that it's actually a little bit too thin for my liking, so I'm just going to add a little bit more to it to get that to a nice consistency. That's about where I want it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and just paint up the areas of the bolt gun that I would like to have sort of, you know, done to up in the lead belcher. Now it's really nice because straight away, don't know if you can really see from that angle, straight away that is coming out really nicely. Sometimes I find with the lead belcher, when I thin it down, it can come out just a bit too thin. And it's, you know, you end up getting it to the stage of, it's like, oh great, you know, I've got to go do multiple layers. Much like Duncan always says, I always tend to do 2 thin coats of this, but if I'm honest, I am finding that when I've used the palette is sometimes you can get away with that 1 coat for the paints like this. So obviously when that was to dry off, I feel that that's actually going to be quite good, and should be quite reasonable in terms of the consistency of it. So you try and get you a nice close-up view on that, if you can see. There we go. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. So like I said, you've got this like nice big flat surface area. Don't be afraid as well to lean. Now my hand's resting on the palette, and when it comes away, it is, like I said, it's not wet in terms of like I need to go dry my hands. It's just damp, and that's the really nice amount of consistency you want with this. And again, you know, if you wanted to, if you wanted to really soak it more heavily on one side for really thinning down, and obviously it's not really something you can do because ultimately it is a sponge, and that water will spread evenly as possible throughout it. Use any additional water you need to thin these down as much as you want, and obviously that will allow you to obviously get thinner ones. If you want to, for example, use something as a glaze or thin down a wash or anything like that, you can do this on the palette, which is good fun, good and really helpful to use. What I'm going to do now is this little patch here of lead belcher. I'm going to leave now, and I'm going to leave it for until I basically post this video, the day I post it. And what I will do in that case is I will leave it and basically just say, and just obviously see how long that stays wet for. One of the things I will say I have found with the wet palettes is that contrast paints do not work on it. So if you are a fan of the Citadel contrast, as you know, contrast paints and water do not really mix very well. So I would not recommend using contrast paints on this. I have given it a try. They split, and it's very hard to get them back to normal. You do have to use quite a lot of the contrast medium. So what I am going to do is, because this is a obviously lead belcher, if anybody uses Citadel paints, this is a base paint. What I will do as well is I'm going to add a layer paint next to it. Just I'm going to get this nice and shaken up. And that layer paint, I want to see how long, because those paints are thinner, I want to see how long they actually last on the hydro foam, on the hydro sheet in the palette. So I'll pop that there. What I will also do as well is, if you've got a metallic base, I will take a non-metallic base, so this Mephiston red, and I'll put that there as well to see how well that holds. And on top of that as well, I'm going to put a wash on here. I'm going to see how long that wash will last before drying out. Now, my experience with my own homemade wet palette did show that with using the homemade wet palette, it did last. I found my paints and everything were lasting for about, well, again, a couple of weeks without any use. I would have to give them a good mix when I got back to them, but you know what, it was well worth it in my mind for that. So I'm just going to add a little bit of this Crimson Carroburg wash. Now, a lot of people don't thin their washes. Obviously, they just whack it straight on. I do find personally to thin your wash slightly, mainly because it's the older chefing sort of phrase, which is you can always add, but you can't take away. So if you are finding that you're putting on a wash on and you're really not liking the look and you think, oh great, I've got to strip my model, just take the time, thin your wash, add it on, and then build it up in layers. And sometimes you can get a way nicer effect. So yeah, there we go. So what I've got here, so you've got this one here, which is the Mephiston Red base paint. You've got the Lead Boucher base, a Moot Green layer, and a Crimson Carroburg shade. What I will, or wash. What I will also do as well is see if I've got some here. Things like the Technical, the Oxide. I'll give it a bit of an experiment and I'll put that on here and see how that works. Again, this isn't something that's traditionally thinned down, but I do find it does have its uses. And obviously I'm not going to try everything from the range in terms of that. I'm not going to put dries on here. I'm not going to put anything technical like the Mephiston Red in terms of the Typhus Corrosion. What I will do though is, because it is the Army Painter palette, I am going to try some Army Painter paints on here. One of the ones I'm going to try is this here, is the Disgusting Slime. Now this is one that I use a lot on my Nurgle stuff, mainly because I do like the fact it's if you compare it to the Nurgle's Rot, it's actually slightly lighter, which allows me to give sort of different textures of slime rather than just the one. I can give you an example of this if I can get the guy. So this was my sort of nearly fully contrasted, sort of converted Great Unclean Cream one, which actually just became a Nurgle Demon Prince. Now, if you can see here at the bottom, let's get a bit of, you can see the back end, might be a bit easier. Get a bit of focus on that. Where I've almost like swirled it, you can see the difference between the two types of slime, and again here on the front. So if you are a sort of Nurgle player and you want to show some differences in your slime, definitely take a look at the Army Painter's Disgusting Slime as well as the Nurgle's Rot, because I do find it's really good. It does split quite easily, so you do need to give this a really good shake. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a droplet of this on the palette as well. And I just kind of want to see how long that lasts for, because it is quite wet anyway, because it is an effects paint. But it would be really nice for me just to see how long that actually stays there for, and if it lasts as well as the other paints. So there we go. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to close this up, and I'm going to leave this for a few days. This next part of the video is me doing a little bit of what I call basically a durability or shake test on this. So because obviously wet palettes and palettes you will take with you if you want to go paint outside of your normal hobby area, what I basically wanted to do was show you how I got on with this one. Yeah, here's this next clip. What I normally tend to do with these is they actually sit in my painting case and it sits flat. And obviously then when I carry my case, I use the handle so it goes this way. So I am quite interested to see how these paints handle, if it does keep them really wet, if they are going to droop. And also if it is in your bag, just generally, you know, your bag will shake as you go, as it bangs against your hip, or, you know, depending on where you have it. So I'm going to give this a good shake. I want to see how those paints react to this. And this is now just me doing it briefly here. Ooh. That is actually quite interesting. I don't know if you guys have been able to see. I have been shaking it. These little droplets right here have just come out when I've been shaking this. And they have got a bit of a tinge of red to them. So I am wondering if me shaking that... So you can see here, I've got liquid coming out either side of this. So I'm going to open this up now and just have a little bit of a check, because I thought that would have sealed a lot better. Ah, there we go. So that is a bit of a shame. It is something that is, if you are using these, you're going to want to consider. Now, the water obviously has gone through the sheet and pooled. And what that has done is that has actually messed the paints. And the red particularly, the Mephiston red, obviously red is one of those colours that people hate painting with, because it obviously stains into your brushes, or it obviously goes through pretty much anything. It's hard to, you know, it's one of those colours that everyone's a bit about. But the fact that this is poured this much, and just from shaking it then, it wasn't overly vigorous. I was just shaking it as if it was in your bag and it was bouncing up and down. That has actually got split for me. Now, what I will do is I'm going to experiment a bit with this, because that might just be because of the amount of water in the foam. Because normally if you're going to use this, you're going to pour the water in, you're not going to do what I do, add 1 or 2 bits and then be done with it. But occasionally you can be yourself nice and set up, you get a phone call from a friend and you're like, I'll come around, and so you go, cool, you pack everything up and you go out. It can be one of those. The fact it's done it this quickly is a bit of a shock. But to be fair, the paints are still wet. Some of them are a little bit merged though because of the red. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to lift this sheet off, because I want to know if that red has stained the foam underneath. So the Mephiston red paint itself hasn't. However, where it has seeped through, that sponge now has gone red. So hopefully that doesn't transfer through to the Hydro sheet. If you were to switch out your sheet and use that, I'm really hoping it won't. Again, it is something I will give this sponge a good clean, and I will give it basically another go. To be honest, looking at this here, I'm thinking there was just a bit too much water in the palette, which is obviously not a fault on the palette side. It is more on mine. But again, a bit of a shock here from the Iron Painter that there is no instructions on how much water to add. In the next part of the video, one of the tests I ran on this is how long do your paints actually stay wet for? So what I did is I set it up, as you see in the next video. I tested a range of paints from the Citadel range, which is the main range I use, as well as an Army Painter paint in there as well. And what I wanted to see was how long they last, if this was just left on your hobby station, if, you know, you have those periods where you decide actually you either don't have time or you're just not really in the mood to paint. So check it out, and then I'll put the timestamps in each one to show you how it was at every stage. So a little bit of experimenting I did here with the wet palette and the hydrofoam. So obviously, as you saw in the previous clip, I'd used it, and to be honest, I probably put too much water on here, which basically caused that when it was for the sake of sort of traveling, it was being shaky. Obviously, a lot of water did pool out and did come out the sides. So what I've done this time is that I've actually taken the foam, I ran it under the tap, rinsed it out slightly, not massively, so you don't put all your weight into squeezing it out, but so it still retained a little bit of the water. This is the one which obviously leaked, and you can see now there is an ever so slight tinge of the red, but not enough that's noticeable. So it does wash out. If you do use it as if it is they treat it as if like any other sponge, and you can wring it out, you can wash it. This was just done with slightly warm water, no sort of other chemicals, and that has pretty much come out, which I'm really happy with. The palette now is very, very lightly wet. Getting sponge over time, it will as it dries, it will release more water. Yeah, so basically the first time I've used it, I probably did put a bit too much in, but now it's nice reasonable amount. Interestingly though, this is the same hydrofoam that you saw me using in the last clip, the hydro sheet. Found that actually running this under the tap and being sort of, getting rid of all that paint, and the sheet still stays perfectly intact. It's still usable, it's still fine. So you can reuse sheets if you are careful. I don't know what it would be like if the paint is fully dried on it. So for example, where this had dried a little bit around the edges, that had obviously it didn't stick for quite as long. It's not come off in their places. Obviously red, as always, never really comes off, but I am finding that is quite interesting. You can, if you are gentle, take your bit of warm water and rub that off, and you can reuse the sheet if you do want to. So I'm just going to pop this down. What I'm basically going to do is I'm just going to do the same experiment, but set it up this time again, because obviously it did become a little bit of a bad experiment where we're shaking everything. So I'm just going to apply, just so you guys can see, the same colours and the same paints all next to each other. So we're going to start off with the lead voucher. So firstly,
I used here, as you saw, the lead belcher from the Citadel range, which is a base paint. It's a metallic I thought was a good one to use. Next up, Mephiston Red, another non-metallic base. After that, a layer paint, which was Moot Green, also from the Citadel range, as well as one of the shades, the Carabao Crimson or Wash paint. After that, I used one of the technical Nickel Oxide, because this is a much thinner paint. And finally, the Disgusting Slime from Army Painter.
What I'm going to do then is I'm going to leave these, I'm going to seal the palette, and I'm just going to leave it here, and I'm going to leave it for sort of 24 hours, and I'm going to come back and have a look, and keep checking it periodically to see how these paints hold up.
So I came back to the palette here. This was after about 8 hours after it had not been used. So this is your stereotypical kind of, you've put your palette to bed overnight, or you've gone to work and you come back and you wanted to have a look. From what I could see, sort of all of the paints seemed more than usable, required minimal if not no mixing to use, which I was quite happy with. It had just been sat on my station, so I hadn't shaken it or anything at all, so there wouldn't have been any external factors to affect this. My paint station, it's worth noting, is actually next to a radiator, so it is a case of, you know, it does get quite hot there. I came to it this time now, so we're looking at about 16 hours, so at this point it was another 8 hours afterwards, and again, as you can see, I'll give you a closer look. So the paints all are pretty good. The Nickel Oxide still more than usable. As you can see there from just above the Moot Green, the lead belcher did slightly start to split. Now, as a metallic paints, they do normally tend to need a bit more work. So I wasn't that shocked by this, but it is more than usable after a little bit of a mix, so I was quite happy with the result. The Mephiston Red seems perfectly fine. It seems pretty easy, pretty simple to use, and again, yeah, minimal mixing as you can see, and really nice consistency. So when it came to the wash, I was quite interested to see how this had held up, and surprised by the fact that, again, this was really easy to use, so good on there. And now for the effects paint. So the Disgusting Slime had split slightly, but it is a paint that does tend to do that, as it is, you know, one of the effects. But otherwise, all of these were usable, and I was very happy, and again, this was after 18 hours. We are now looking 36 hours. So this is sort of a day and a half, and again, we'll give you a good close-up of the paints here. So, as you can see, so having a quick look, I'll go through the paints one at a time. So starting off with the Mephiston Red, really nice consistency, really easy and simple to use. Very happy with that. After 36 hours, very easy to come back to. The lead belcher again had split slightly. After a little bit of work, it was really good, really usable, but didn't require much excess water added to it. The Moot Green, again, no problems, which surprises me because it is a thinner paint, as with the Nickel Oxide and the Carabao Crimson Wash. The Army Painter one had slightly split, but again, this isn't anything new for the Disgusting Slime. Otherwise, again, after 36 hours, I'm very happy with how these guys have turned out. So yeah, no problems there with those. I'm going to set it aside now, and again, check it in a bit. So at this point, we are talking 48 hours. This is 2 solid days of sat on my paint station, which is right next to a radiator. Again, you know, it's not as if it's my radiator gets very hot. It is right next to the station, so it may have had some adverse effects on this, but I was very happy to see that after 48 hours, all of these paints are still usable. The Mephiston Red was still nice consistency, as you saw. The Moot Green, again, a really nice consistency here. Even the lead belcher, even though it looks like it split, was actually easy to use after a quick mix. Same again with the Disgusting Slime effects paint. And the thinnest, one of the thinnest of them all, the technical from Citadel, the Oxide there, again, was really usable. So I was very happy with these. They all are, again, this is 48 hours. I'm quite happy. No problems with those. We move on to the final test now. This is 72 hours. So this is, it sat on my paint station for 72 hours. You can see I've done a little bit of hobby at this point. And this is, you know, all I've done is I've moved it slightly to one side. Now looking at this, actually, the Mephiston Red, although it was slightly damp to the touch, this wouldn't be what I classify as a usable paint. This is just more of a case of it dried out quite a bit. It was got and it was the sort of thing where I would need to get fresh paint from the pot. The lead belcher was slightly more usable, but I would have personally I would have added more paint from the pot on there. So again, 72 hours seems to be the line for those base paints. The moot green, so a layer paint which is normally thinner, was still more than usable, which made me very happy. The oxide and the Caribou Crimson wash, both again usable there, which shocks me a bit because they are thinner than the base paints. The disgusting slime was just about passable with there, and that was so it was kind of one of those, again, I would get more out of the pot for it. But otherwise, yeah, after that time, I'm pretty happy with those.
One of the final things that I wanted to check with this here is the brush storage. Now this boasts that it can hold quite a nice amount of brushes in it, which is exactly what you want, although even though it is thin. So what I wanted to do was check it against brushes that your standard Citadel brushes that you use. If you have any other third-party brands, so for example Medan or anything like that, or for myself, I do have some of the chunkier brushes as well that you can use, so I wanted to see if they would fit. So check it out and I'll let you see how I got on with the brush storage. So for the next part of the video, I wanted to touch on brush storage. Obviously, as we lift off the lid and for the first layer, you can see here that it has got room here to fit some of your brushes. So what I wanted to do is have a look and see what sort of size brushes I can fit in there. Obviously, we know that these slots here will hold the triangular Wargamer brushes from Army Painter, and that here it looks like you can easily fit a couple of Citadel brushes or whatever the ones you use. Now, if you do use some other third-party brushes like I do, so for example, I've got these here, which is a range called Golden Maple, which I've picked up. Which mainly, to be honest, a lot of those I picked up because those bristles are really great over here for the contrast paints that have come out. And I wanted to, because I was experimenting with the contrast paints, I wanted to get myself some brushes that were good quality but not overly expensive, so that if during my experiments, anything did go wrong, I would learn from that. So what I'll do to start with is, so I carry basically these around, these go in my case, and then I have this here, which is one of the Warhammer sort of paint brushes holders. What I want to do now is see basically how the Citadel brushes stack up, see if I can fit any of these in here, and then basically just give a bit of a review on the brush storage. So first off, let's start off and opening this. So some of the brushes that obviously a lot of people tend to keep safe are obviously their detail brushes, or their sort of glaze, things like that, and basically any brushes where they would try and keep these tips on them. So obviously they do fit in these slots here, but they will be a little bit loose because these are obviously designed for the triangular brushes. Now, interestingly, this slot here is, so if I pop this back here, that does actually fit from edge to edge with the holder on it. But if I try to put it in the slot here just for the brushes, it's weird, it's almost like it's ever so slightly smaller, and which is a little bit peculiar. So obviously I may have to trim down just the tip of this if I want to keep those brushes in there. For some of the older brushes, like this is the old Citadel large dry brush, see how that fits, and that unfortunately just wouldn't fit in here. It's just too long with the bristles, and also the handle, it just wouldn't fit, so that will have to be one that stays in my case. You have the standard medium base brush, or large base brush, sorry, from Citadel, and that fits well. Now I keep my extra small artificial layer one still in its tube. Now I think it's pretty obvious that that tube wouldn't fit in there, so personally I would rather keep it in this, just because obviously I know then that it's not going to get damaged in any way, shape or form. We're going to try again some more Citadel brushes. Now the medium shades looks like they do fit, but again you're going to have to make the decision of choosing to sacrifice the tube at the top to fit the brushes all in here, and depending on what type of brush and how you like to keep your bristles, that's a decision you'll need to make. I do use a few other brushes, so from other brands, so I'll just grab those. So these are some Medan brushes, and I do find they are slightly smaller, but they do fit in here quite nicely, which is quite good. And again, because these handles are a lot smaller, I feel like here they would rattle around a bit. But I'm pretty sure you can fit a couple of brushes in there quite easily. Now moving on to if you have any other third-party brushes which have very large handles, so going back to these ones, I want to try and see if I can fit these in here And if I can shut the lid on here as well, so you can see the lid is slightly indented, so you have got a little bit of wiggle room. So I want to try and see how I can do these. So I'm going to start with the smallest brush. And again, I'm going to have to make the decision just to snip the tip of that just a little bit for this brush to be able to sit in there. So moving on to kind of the mid-range brush. So that's good, I quite like that. It does fit. Again, obviously it's not going to fit a tube sort of around it, but if it's in here, my concern would be because it doesn't hold completely solid in these slots. If this is jostling about and it pushes up against that, you're going to get that sort of effect that you can see on here, where it is going to crumple and it is going to damage the brushes. And then going on to the largest of the brushes that this set comes with, and again, even without this tube, that's not going to be able to fit there. The tip of the brush is going to push up against this. So that is a bit of a shame. I was hoping to be able to store some of my brushes in this, so I wouldn't have to obviously carry multiple things around with me in order for my brushes. I do think though that it does have some good qualities. So for example, if you do use the Wargamer brushes from Army Painter, then they're gonna slot in here really well. They're gonna fit. They're like triangular, so they'll click into place. If you are using just mainly sort of a standard brushes without the chunky handles, so instead of these sort of ones, if you are using say Citadel brush or one of these sort of brushes like from another party, like I don't think you're going to have much of a problem with them here. I would recommend getting some tubes just to protect the bristles, because what you don't want to happen is as this jostles about, is that pushing up against there and ruining your bristles, because you'll spend the time getting it out and trying to get that point right back to where it should be. But overall, I think it does have some uses in terms of its storage. It is one of those ones, again, through experience, you'll learn what brushes you do and you don't fit in there. To be honest, for myself, I will probably stick with my holder here because it has got the slots in it and it does hold everything really nice. So that's probably about it, really. But obviously with the indented bit here, you can fit some of the thicker brushes on. It is just a case of, obviously, if you're jostling around in your bag, my concern would be if it does sort of hit up against the sides here. And there we have it. So that was the review of the Army Painter wet palette. What I will go through is I'll go through a few of the key points and just basically just to summarize everything going through there. So first off, it would be the setup. I was disappointed that there were no instructions in the box, and it did take me a little while to get used to setting it up. The best way I would recommend is to take your hydrofoam, run it under a tap, give it a wring out until it gets a consistency you're happy with, then place it in your wet palette. Put your hydro sheet on top of that, and then there you go, you're ready to set up. Just make sure you do take the time to brush out any of those air bubbles on your hydro sheet, because you want to have a nice flat surface area for your paints. How long your paints will last, you saw from the video, the only one that went reasonably dry, or was kind of at the point where you would have to add more paint from your pot to it with, to get it back to a usable standard, was the Mephiston Red, and that was after 72 hours of being sat on my station. So if you are taking long breaks, either wet your sponge even more, so the hydrofoam then has got a nice amount of moisture to keep your paints wet, or basically just check in on it, give it a little bit of mix up sort of every day or so, just to make sure that it's okay. But otherwise, yeah, you've got a nice shelf life on there. Compared to my own homemade palette, to be honest, my homemade one lasted longer, but again, that was a thick sponge on there. That wasn't this thin hydrofoam. But I would say, yep, it gets a tick from me on the fact that it keeps your paints wet, and generally on its usage as well, I do find it gives you that nice sort of coat on it for your paints, and it gives you that really sort of nice consistency where actually, if you do get it to the right sort of thickness or thinness, you will get away with just the one coat rather than the two thin coats. In terms of the brush storage, now that's probably the part I'm most disappointed at with this, mainly just because it's the type of brushes I use, because I keep the tubes on the end of them and I want to make sure the bristles are intact, as with most people, either having to snip those down or basically not put them in there at all is just the only ways you can fit the brushes in. It is good for the Army Painter Wargamer brushes. I will give them that because they do click into the slots, and they're not going to move about anywhere. but any other brands, to be honest, I just don't think without any protective tubes on those, there's not point storing them in there. You're just going to have your bristles like this pushing up against it, and obviously you're going to damage your brushes by doing that. So that would be the part I probably am most disappointed with. Another part I wasn't overly happy with, as you saw from the clips, was the shake test. So you saw, obviously, you take your palette. If you take it with you anywhere, you're not going to always be able to have it perfectly flat in your bag, and your bag is going to move about. You know, so it did leak, the paints did run, but at the end of the day, they are liquid. It's not like it's going to hold them exactly in place. So I think you can sort of get away with it if you do put your paints on here and you don't have too much water in the base. You can actually take this with you. I have managed to do so once or twice, but I have kept it perfectly flat. That would be the only way for me to basically get was to get anywhere. And again, they did move a little bit. Just maybe keep your paints on the hydro sheet kind of spaced out. But to be honest, most hobby painters that I know, we all tend to have stations that we work on, and your palette's not really going to leave there. If you are going out and about, maybe don't take your wet palette, take something else. It's down to yourself. If you do find a way else to take it about, and you think is a really good way to store it, let me know in the comments below, because that is something I would like to hear about from you guys if you do pick one up. Yeah, so overall, like I said, I am very happy with it. For its price, I think it's price pointed really well. You know, RRP's at £18. Most sort of independent stores will sell it for a little cheaper, and online you can get it for around about £16.95, if not a little cheaper than that. I think it's a really great that it comes with so many hydro sheets, and we saw how durable they were during my test, where you can actually rinse them off and use them again. Yet to find out any information on refills. Again, that might just be me not looking hard enough, but I can't really see any refills on there. But with 50 sheets and 2 foams, I don't think you're going to need to refill those anytime soon. So yeah, overall, I would give a thumbs up to the Army Painter wet palette, and would recommend getting one if you are interested in getting a wet palette at a reasonable RRP. There are some better ones out there, there are a lot more worse ones. Both of which I would say are price pointed at more than this one here. So if you can get one, I would say pick it up and to elevate your hobby painting game. Otherwise, I hope you guys have enjoyed the review. If you'd like to see more videos like this, let me know in the comments if there's anything you'd like me to review. And as always, if you do like the video, please let me know, and like and subscribe. And if you want to keep up to date with all of the videos I post, hit that little notification bell. Otherwise, thank you very much for tuning in, and we will see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.